Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm Doug Sharp, and today we have with us Henry M. Morris, who is really one of the founders of the modern creation movement. I'm a real privilege to be able to speak with him today and to maybe get a little perspective as to how the whole creation evolution movement started, and because of his involvement with his book, The Genesis Flood, we are able to probably be able to see more about how God created the earth, how the flood influenced the earth's history, and Dr. Morris, we're so glad to have you interview with us today.
Thank you.
The first thing I would like to ask you, Dr. Morris, is how you personally became involved in studying the creation issue, how you, what influenced you to make a decision that compromise positions weren't working for you, and how you then came up with your model of the creation model.
Well, I hope it isn't my model. I hope it's just the biblical model.
That's right.
Of course, I became a Christian when I was just a young boy, about 8 years old, I think, through reading the Bible, and was baptized then at about age 10. But then during high school days and college days, I had become an evolutionist, a theistic evolutionist. Went until graduating and moving back to El Paso, where I had a job in the government for several years. Got into a good church and really got going in Bible study. And then I heard Dr. Erwin Moon one time in his Sermons for Science, and he talked about the flood and about the vapor canopy and various things that I'd never heard of before. Got interested. Then when I went back to teach at Rice University, where I'd been an undergraduate student, had my degree, during World War II, I wanted to witness for Christ then on the campus among the students. I'd also joined the Gideons and become active with that. So I wanted to do what I could to lead the students to Christ. They were all in the Navy and were going to be going into the war soon, so I thought it was important to do that. So I began, but these were all engineering and science students, so they had to have answers. They couldn't just quote scripture to them. And so I began to study not only the Bible, but also the books on evolution that were, up to that point, I thought maybe evolution was God's method of creation, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I began to study the evidences for evolution. I found there was no evidence there, but all just philosophy and guesswork. And also I went through the Bible verse by verse to find if there's any way of harmonizing evolution with the Bible, and found there was not.
Mm-hmm.
So I soon became a creationist, and what they call young earth creationist now. I would prefer to call it a biblical, literal creationist, maybe.
There you go. You take like Humphreys, what he says is that he takes the Bible in a straightforward manner. And that's exactly where I want to come from. I want to say the same things that the Lord would say in regards of how he put the world all together. And that's really what we're all about.
Well, being an engineer by background, I think the practical way of looking at things is that you take things to mean what they say unless there's evidence in the context that they don't.
Exactly. Right.
And so God was certainly able to do that, I figured. And so doing that, well, that's what you got out with. Everything was created in 6 days. And there was later a worldwide flood that changed the whole face of the earth. And the Bible is true. Every word of it is inspired. And I go from there, and I think it all works. And the older I get, the more convinced I am that the Bible is truly the Word of God.
And I find the same thing. The more that I study, the more that I find that the things that people bring up as objections to the Bible are easily answered if you really take a more than a superficial look at the evidence that is out there. And I think what is important to do is to be able to crystallize in the minds of certain people that it is possible to make that reconciliation between scientific fact and the Bible, and do it relatively easily. and show them the ways to actually find out evidence as they really need to do that more. I was wondering, one of my friends, I related to you in the hallway just a few minutes ago, that one of my friends from Traverse City knew Alfred Rehwinkle. He wrote a book about the flood. Did you know him?
I never did know him, but I did read his book years ago on the flood.
Uh-huh. Did that have any influence on your thinking?
Well, by that time, I'd already become convinced of the
Okay.
worldwide flood just through my own reading. And I'd read the books by George McCready Price, who had written on
Okay.
that thing too.
Oh.
But yes, it was a very good book, and I thought it was excellent. I did read it carefully, and I think it probably had an influence.
Mhm. I was influenced by an old book that I found in my grandmother's estate. It was called The Bible in the 19th Century. It was written by a fellow named Luther Townsend. And
I didn't read that book, but I've read something written by him. I forget now what it was. But
yeah,
I know the name. He was a good man.
and I was so impressed by this book because what it was a book about ancient literature by pagan religions as compared to the Bible, and how much more accurate the Bible was in terms of describing truth than these pagan religions. These other religions had the sun and moon being crystals and things that really we know as scientific nonsense, whereas the Bible, when you get right down to it, is very accurate in terms of the way it's describing things. And the other person that I'm quite interested in with your relationship to was in your original book on Genesis flood, you had a number of things from Clifford Burdick. Did you know Clifford Burdick?
Yes,
Did you
I
work
knew
with him?
quite well.
And he seemed to be quite a interesting person in terms
He
of...
was that.
He liked to find fossils and strata out sequence, and
He was a geologist. He never did get a fully accredited doctor's degree in geology, but he had a master's degree and bachelor's, and was a very competent field geologist.
Mhm.
He had a lot of good evidence.
a number of years ago, I was in the Navy. I was out here in San Diego working with, I was in the Navy, and of course I didn't have a lot of time to spend on a lot of things, but when I was out here, because of where I lived, I worked with Kelly Seagraves and Robert Kofall a little bit. What is your relationship to that group of people?
Well, they were with us, or that is Kelly was, not Bob Kofall, for the first little over a year when we first started out here at Christian Heritage College.
Uh-huh.
But they left to form their own organization, which
Uh-huh.
was called the Creation Science Research Center at the time.
Mhm.
But had very little contact with them since that time, back in 1972.
Okay. Yeah, I remember talking with them and actually doing a talk with them at one point at a church, and I thought that they had some interesting things to say. But maybe you can relate to us a little bit about how ICR got started and how you began this work out here in San Diego. You were at Virginia someplace or before?
I was, for 13 years, head of civil engineering at Virginia Tech.
Mhm.
Before that, I'd been in several other universities teaching engineering. But during that time, I'd become convinced of the deadly effect of evolution on the
Mhm.
students and on the families and the churches and everything. I'd written a couple of books by that time, The Genesis Flood and some others. So I felt there was a need for a full-time creation research complex of some kind. I talked to a number of Christian colleges about that, but none of them felt they could do that. until I met Dr. Tim LaHaye one time, and he was going to start a Bible college in San Diego, and he'd read a couple of books of mine and heard me speak, so he invited me to join with him, which we did. Instead of a Bible college, it was to be a liberal arts college, in which all of the curriculum would be based around creation instead of evolution. And then associated with that, we wanted to have a research ministry of some kind, which eventually became ICR. And Christian Heritage College was formed as a liberal arts college. It's still going very well. It's grown quite a bit. But then ICR separated from that in 1980 and 81 in order to form our graduate school, because the accrediting people would not let Christian Heritage form a graduate program. And we felt that it was important to have graduate training available for Christians and creationists in science. So we formed ICR. We already had it formed, but it was we added the graduate school at that time. And then we became a separate organization, been that way now for the last 20 years, I guess.
So what kind of degrees do you offer at ICR?
Well, we have Master of Science degrees in the key sciences that relate to origins. We have one in geology and biology and physics, which emphasizes astrophysics and geophysics, and then also in science education. We thought we would have more, also have PhD degrees, but the Lord hasn't provided the funds yet for us to do that, so we still offer these same 4 degrees, and we've had that school going for, 20 years almost now. A lot of graduates, and they're all maintaining the strong position on scientific creationism that they were taught. And the degrees themselves are accredited nationally through Transnational Association of Christian Schools, which is recognized by the Federal Department of Education as an official accrediting agency for our type of school.
Well, I correspond with Mark Armitage, and I think he was one of your
Yes, he has been a student here.
And he's studying radio halos, I guess. Isn't that what he's doing now?
You doing what?
Radio halos?
Mark wasn't studying that, I don't think. Is that what you said? He was interested. He was a biologist primarily.
Okay. Well, it
But,
seems like somebody was.
We have a committee going studying the whole subject of radioactive dating.
Oh yes. One of the people we interviewed last year was John Woodmoraphy.
Yes.
And he lives in Chicago, and we went and visited him and got a nice interview with him. And,
yeah, he's a very, very talented geologist, I think.
Interesting fellow.
Yeah, very much.
And we did a show with him called Rocks Are Not Clocks.
Uh-huh.
And we're trying to promote what you folks are doing, and we hope that our little organization will help influence people to read the stuff that you have, and
We've published 3 books of his now, and one of them on radioactive dating, and very good, and another on Noah's Ark, and another one just on general flood
he's a
geology.
very detailed person, almost to the point where it drives you nuts.
Yes, he's the best I ever saw in terms of literature research. He just
Yes, he.
reads everything.
As a matter of fact, when he came to visit us, he and I went to the Michigan State University Library, and he had out 100 books stacked up on the thing. He was just going like this and like this.
Yeah,
And
he's great at that. He's made a unique contribution, I think.
oh, I think so. And I appreciate him. We got to know him quite well during a visit that we did with him at a church that we had him speak, and also when we visited him and did an interview. And it was, I think that God's got his hand on him to do a special work, and I'm glad for him to do that. Let me see what else we can talk about. Was there any one thing that triggered you to abandon the theistic evolutionist line? What was the one thing or 2 things that started you thinking in
Well,
in that direction.
as I mentioned, I made a thorough study of the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
By that time, I'd become convinced that the Bible was the Word of God.
Okay.
And I'd seen it work in the lives of many people, so I knew it had to be right. And there's just no way you could fit evolution in the Bible, I found.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was reading the evolutionary literature.
Mm.
There wasn't any creationist literature much at that time. This
Right.
was back during World War II days. So there was not, in the evolutionary books and the articles I read, there was no good evidence for evolution. So I decided on the basis of both types of reading, Bible and science, that evolution was false and creation was true. And I wrote my first book at that time, back in 1946, as a result of that reading.
And so what was that book?
Well, that was called That You Might Believe.
Okay.
And the Lord greatly used it. A lot of people came to Christ through that. But it took the same position pretty much that I've held ever since,
Mm-hmm.
except that for a while I kind of left the gap theory as an option.
Okay.
Pretty well changed that pretty quick then. But
Yeah, I was fiddling around with that myself for a number of years until this whole issue is a tough one to straighten out if you're just going at it blind. And what happened to me was that I was going at it from the creating life in the test tube aspect. I thought, well, would be an interesting experiment to see if we can take Miller-Urey's experiment where they create amino acids and you start, well, let's suppose now we start out with amino acids and add a little bit more energy to that system, will we create proteins? Well, I find out you get a lot of
not quite.
a lot of brown sticky goo out of that,
Yeah.
but not a whole lot of proteins, and that started me to really think that evolution really can't be true, because at the beginning, if you can't get the molecules to self-organize, how are you going to get evolution to
Right.
continue on from there? And that was when I started really search the Bible and God, and of course at that time I was attending church and trying to make some sense all of my life at that time too, and I think the two things helped to come together when I met Dr. John Moore and learned that there are actually people out there who do believe the Bible and also have a scientific mind. And I'm glad for such people as you and Dr. John Moore and those around me who were able to influence me in that way. And so I appreciate you for what you've done. One other question I had for you has to do with your book, The Genesis Flood. It's been many years since that's 40 years since that's been published. If you were to publish that book today, what would you change in that book?
Very little that I would change. I'd add a lot to it.
You'd add a lot to
Because
it.
there's been a lot of research done since that time, which I think has strengthened the case.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there's very much in there that is really wrong.
Mm-hmm. And it's like I put together a little book. This started out for my Sunday school class, and it sort of grew out of that, Revolution Against Evolution. And there's little things that I'd probably delete and add and change now, because I know quite a bit more. But I think that the creation issue is still a solid one, that the more evidence that we accumulate for, in the scientific sense, that there's really little that you have to change in that aspect.
Yeah, when I wrote the Genesis Flood, or when I should say Dr. Whitcomb and I wrote it, I wrote the geological parts.
Mm-hmm.
That there was no creationist treatment much at all in that vein, except one or two books by a couple of Seventh-day Adventist
Mm-hmm.
scientists or preacher really. So there wasn't much. So I had to more or less dig it out just out of the evolutionary literature and rethink it. But since that time, of course, there have been a lot of other books written. I've written a bunch of them, and many other people have too. so that the case for creation is, I think, much stronger than ever. And I would like to add things to the Genesis flood if I were ever going to rewrite it, which I'm not.
Yeah.
But,
Well, it certainly is a classic, and I would recommend even now that people go out and buy it and read it, because it certainly is a wealth of information.
well, like I say, I don't think there's very much wrong with it. Might be a few little details that you polish up a little bit, but
Mhm.
generally its position is still good, still the same. It's just been strengthened quite a bit by
That's
later
right.
studies.
And, we've probably have certain aspects of the creation model that we are still revising and refining,
Yeah.
but the basic foundation of it, I think, is quite solid.
Mhm.
Well, Dr. Morris, I think that we're running out of time. I appreciate your involvement in this and starting a lot of the things that we see here today, and I'm glad to be able to interview you, and I hope that you.
Well, thank you.
that
Appreciate the
God
work you're doing,
continue-
and hope this will be a help.
Okay,
So,
God bless you. I appreciate you, and we'll see you later.
Thank you.
See you next time on Revolution Against Evolution. We want to pay tribute to a great
Yes.
founder of the creation movement, Dr. Henry M. Morris. The reason that we're paying tribute to him is that this past weekend he passed on to life with the Lord, and of course we lose a tremendous voice for creation. Although he still hasn't said everything that he was going to say in print, because we have part of the manuscript for Persuaded by the Evidence that he wrote, which we're excited to be able to have him included, his testimony included in with the book that we're preparing for print in maybe later on this year. So
Is it going to come out that quick?
yes, I just heard from Master Books. They've going to issue a book contract to us pretty soon.
Now, this is a book where we have many creationist voices, bios and whatnot. Henry M. Morris is in. Who else is in it? We have quite a few. Jerry Bergman and
Dwayne Gish,
Gary Parker.
And we have Paul Back, who's a professor at Oxford.
So,
And we have some fairly ordinary people like you and me.
like me, like us, we're in there too. But yeah, that's pretty exciting.
And the whole idea of this book was to be able to present what scientific evidence really convinced you.
Right, we're persuaded by the evidence. Henry Morris, he was a prolific writer, Doug. I don't know if anybody has written any more books and articles and things than he has. I don't know. Do you have any idea how many books he's actually written? I was trying to figure it out.
I think it's over 60, something
yeah,
like that.
over
but
60 books and just countless articles. And every month he would he would put something in the Days of Praise thing, or he'd put
Acts and Facts.
Acts and Facts. He'd have something in there. But this is the guy who really founded modern creation, the modern creation movement. I was looking at some of the sources that he was inspired by. And one of them, George McReady Price, I'm familiar with, but the other guy I wasn't familiar with, Dr. Rimmer.
Harry Rimmer is the name, and he
Yeah.
actually was a prolific writer during the Depression era, and also in the 1940s and he died in 1952, I think. But
1952 is correct. 1890, 1952. I just happened to read it. It's not because I'm smarter than
Yeah.
Doug. I just was looking over the article before the show was going on the air. But I think in the 20s and 30s there were still people really standing for a good biblical foundation, a good creationist foundation. McReady Price. Now he was Seventh-day Adventist. Is that right? And then because the only denominations that didn't really capitulate, it seemed like, were Missouri Synod Lutheran and Seventh-day Adventists. They were about the only ones, probably thanks to I don't know why the Lutheran Church didn't tank.
well, that's because of Walter Lang,
Oh, okay, all right, okay.
the Bible Science Association.
When Henry Morris came on the scene and his book came out, well, at least when his book came on the scene, The Genesis Flood, what was it, 1961?
Right.
That's what I think it was. It changed everything. I read that book, Doug, and I'm telling you, I would never want to look back. And even today, though some of the evidences they've modified or changed, or they've kind of Some of them aren't as strong as they once were. The very thing that he did was undermine the thing that basically props up Darwinian evolution, and that was Lyellian geology. This guy was a hydrologist. He was a geologist type of a. He thought about that, and that's what I thought was so cool about the Genesis flood, and it resonated with me in 100 ways.
What a great human being and creationist.
We're going to miss him.
We are going to miss his writings and his influence on the creation community. Well, we hope you enjoyed our little tribute to Dr. Henry M. Morris on Revolution Against Evolution, and we'll see you next time.